All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jomo Stewart at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. I am joined by our intrepid super volunteer, Mr. Roger Burgraff. It is February 1st, about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're here for the Energy for All Alaska Task Force. And our guest today is Mr. Frank Richards. He's actually president and CEO of the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation, here to give us an update regarding the project, the Corp, and some analyses that they've recently done and received relative to the project. So without further ado, President Richards, good to see you. It's been about a year, so nice to see you again, sir. Thank you for the update.
Good morning, Jomo. Yes, and I did look back on what we presented about a year ago, and times have changed. But thank you all for allowing me to again speak to you this morning. Hopefully you're all doing well and surviving the cold spell up there, as well as having a fine winter. What I wanted to provide to you today was a general update and overview of what we've done with the Alaska LNG project to date in regards to our commercial structure, as well as continuing to work in advancing the project to make it more commercially economic and viable. And then report to you on the latest outcome, which was an independent third-party analysis by a firm called Wood Mackenzie, who had originally looked at the project back in 2016 when we were under the producer-led effort. And at that time, the Wood Mackenzie analysis was that it was an uneconomic project due to the high cost of supply. And so when I use that term cost of supply, it is the cost of delivered LNG to the Asian market. And so that's what I'll be identifying today in our discussion, is the viability and the cost of supply of what we see that Alaska LNG could deliver to those Asian markets. So I know that we've got about an hour. I've got a number of slides here. I hope that we'll have some questions. And if you have some during the discussion, please let me know. Very good. So the outcome of our work with Wood Mackenzie is that it is deemed by their analysis to be an economic project. And when they say that, it's really looking at our competitiveness against the US Gulf Coast LNG projects that are currently operational and selling into both Europe and Asia. And what their metric is the cost of supply. And so that's how our analysis has identified that we truly are economic. So a little bit of history from how we got here. Again, Wood Mackenzie in 2016 was contracted by not only AGDC, but our partners at the time, which were ExxonMobil and BP, to do a competitive analysis of Alaska LNG at that time. If you remember, we were just wrapping up our pre-FEED effort, so we had a new cost estimate at the time of about $44 billion for the entire project. That includes the gas treatment plant on the slope, the pipeline from Prudhoe Bay to Nikiski, and then a liquefaction facility in Nikiski, along with a loading berth and dock for LNG tankers. That level of analysis identified that we were in the range of about $11.50 delivered to Asia, which at the time was the highest cost of supply against the competitors that we had at the time. Move forward now to 2022, the work efforts that we've undertaken to advance the project, not only achieving all of our authorizations, federal authorizations, so taking out a major risk factor to the project, but also aligning a new commercial structure, which I'll describe a little bit more detail later. But we moved essentially from a producer-led equity-based model to now what we're calling a tolling model. This mirrors what a lot of the LNG projects have done since 2016, where they're utilizing the contracts for the sale of contracts for the sale of LNG out of the plants to underpin the financing. And this has driven down the cost of financing for the project, because they haven't gone from 100% equity to their ranges are from 70 to 80% debt financing and then 20 to 30% equity financing, which brings down the overall cost of the project. But what we see from Wood Mac's analysis is that for Alaska LNG, we are their independent economic model showed a cost of supply of about $6.70 delivered into North Asia. And then when you compare that to US Gulf Coast, the two bars to the right on this, it shows the capacity charge. And that's the charge of the LNG being essentially processed through the plants at either a $2 charge or a $2.50 charge. So on those projects, they buy Henry Hub gas, they liquefy it, provide their capacity charge, then they have to ship it to Asia. And as you can see, we have a significant advantage over the shipping costs, but we also have the advantage of not being tied to a market hub price, such as Henry Hub. And our process is that we're going to be able to provide a long-term stable price to the buyers of the LNG. And that has been very well received in the buyer community. Now, the makeup of the $6.70 cost of supply includes the raw gas cost, which includes about a 15% charge for the feedstock to be able to cover the turbines along the compressors and at the liquefaction facility. So that's a change where we're now showing about a raw gas and fuel at $1.15. And then the gas treatment plant with the project cost reductions and optimizations that we have brought into the project over the last few years. That means that the project is now about a $38.7 billion project. So the individual components include the gas treatment plant on the North Slope, where the CO2 and hydrogen sulfide are removed and then pushed back into the reservoir. The pipeline, which includes 8 compressor stations, as well as the pipeline from Point Thompson to Prudhoe Bay, and then the liquefaction facility and marine terminal in Nikiski. So those are the various component costs right now, from 16.8 billion down to 9.2 billion for the GTP. And then the tolling cost you see on the chart to the right, ranging from $1.16 up to $2.24 for the LNG component. What Wood Mac showed, though, is that from their 2016 to 2022 project costs, they've actually seen a cost of shipping increase. So what they were showing is about a 60-cent cost to ship it from Alaska to East Asia, and it's now about 76 cents. So that is the makeup of our cost of supply. I want to identify that this is on the full 20 million ton per annum project, but please realize that we have kept 500 million standard cubic feet a day for Alaska's needs. And we had an allocation of up to 300 million standard cubic feet a day for Alaska as we transition from Cook Inlet to North Slope gas, as well as additional industries that could be brought on, hopefully, to be able to consume that gas in state. However, if it is not consumed in state, then that means there's more gas available for liquefaction or for potentially ammonia production in the state that could be then sold on the world market. So what this means for in-state users is that the components that the state of Alaska consumers would have to pay for is the raw gas cost, the gas treatment plant, and the pipeline component, plus a little bit of operations and maintenance on top of that. But that's where we're identifying to internal markets within the state that we're in that $4 to $5 range because we don't have to cover the cost of liquefaction or shipping to Asia.
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
If I may, last slide, I guess I'll jump right in, get the ball rolling. My understanding of these kinds of projects is they're very sensitive. The price to the user is very sensitive relative to the price of the feedstock. How firm do we feel that $1.15 feed gas price is?
So, Jomo, if you remember that AGDC has actually had gas sales agreements with the producers on the slope. We had not identified what the individual price was, and we always talked in the range from about $1 to $1.50. So what we are showing here, or what Wood Mac is showing here, is a dollar price range with 15% for fuel requirements. That is a point. Again, the goal of the producers would be to maximize their cost of gas. However, they have a stranded asset, and so they would like to be able to monetize that asset. That's going to be a negotiation on that price between the LNG buyers and the producers, where we have provided our inputs into Wood Mac, and we feel that we have an aspirational goal here of $1.15. But on the high end, again, the range from $1 to $1.15 is compared to Henry Hub, which fluctuates. It was yesterday over $5. It's been up over $6 in this last few months. If that levels back down to the $3 to $4 range, we're still showing competitiveness. We envision the gas price that will be provided to the LNG buyers will be long-term stable pricing with a slight inflation factor.
Sir, I do see a hand up. It's Miss Marianne Peace. Marianne, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, just a quick question. Frank, what an exciting update. It's so good to hear this update. We have a new player on the North Slope, and it's Hilcorp. And even though we've had gas supply contracts in the past, and they have been at very reasonable prices, have you had any concrete discussions with Hilcorp to advance the same, dollar to $1.50 range? And are they willing to do that given their monopoly position in South Central at 772 gas?
Very good question, Marianne, and Happy New Year to you. The discussions that we're having with Hilcorp are, again, confidential discussions. However, I would say that Hilcorp, along with the other gas owners, with ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, we are in routine discussions with them about the cost of supply, and they are actively working with us in regards to our efforts in bringing on project developers who are keenly interested in what the cost of supply will be. So those are ongoing commercial discussions, and I would say that Hilcorp is actively engaged in those.
Actually, I'll lob out one more thing, if I may, Mr. Richards, Mr. President. My understanding is, over time, day by day, the gas moves from being not just a stranded commodity, but a problem, something that they have to, spend ever more efforts to cycle along with water. So that may work in our favor, and should be working in our favor as we move forward. Is that fair, or is that correct?
Well, again, the operator is going to be in a position to identify, when is the opportune time to be able to allow for this offtake. But I'll identify to the group, again, when Hilcorp was not there, but BP, Exxon, and ConocoPhillips applied to AOGCC for offtake off the slope. They did that, I think, in 2016 timeframe, 2015, 2016. And that was the time when they identified that they wanted the opportunity to offtake 3.9 billion cubic feet of gas out of both Prudhoe Bay and Point Thompson. So that's where AOGCC then granted the entities to be able to allow for offtake, knowing full well that there was a potential for some slight oil recovery reductions. However, that's all has to be factored into the time frame. And so from 2016, when at the time we were looking at actual completion by the mid-2020s, we're now selling our project because of the delays in time now into the 2030s. So that means there will be more oil produced over that interim. Again, the gas, right now, 8 billion cubic feet of gas comes up on a daily basis and then is pumped back down and helps with oil recovery. We're looking to offtake 3.3 billion cubic feet of gas. So there'll be still an additional 6 billion that will be cycled back up and put back down at the reservoir. And then I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Mr. Richards, I do see that Mr. Latcham has his hand up. Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Jomo. Just a quick question. If you're going to pursue the tolling plan arrangement, it seems like you'd let Hilcorp start working directly with some of your end users. Has that come up yet? That way it gets you out of the position of being the merchant. Did I understand you were going to pursue a tolling model now?
Yes. Yep. You're correct, Ray.
So why not let Hillcorp and Tokyo, like TEPCO or whoever, work out their own deal, and you focus on just being the toller?
Well, very good point, Ray. And so I would identify that we have a group that we're calling our strategic parties. And those are the entities that include the producers, include the developers, and include the downstream buyers. So they are in discussions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay,
so this really just shows the waterfall chart of how we went from 1150 plus down to the 670. And the biggest component, as you can see, is the project financing component, where we went from 100% equity under the producer-led model now to a 70-30 debt equity finance model, and then with the third-party tolling structure. The second component is the cost reduction that I talked about, where we did optimizations in 2020 and brought the price down from that 45 billion down to 38.7 billion across the three main sub-projects, including the GDP pipeline and LNG. And then the feed gas within the Wood Mac report in 2016, the feed gas was pegged at $2.09 per MMBTU, and then now a reduction down to $1.15. And then, as I said, there was a slight price escalation in terms of the shipping cost. So this identifies the main components that Wood Mackenzie had identified as the reasons why the cost of supply has gone down. And I will identify that Wood Mackenzie in 2016 did provide some recommendations on ways to reduce the overall cost of supply. One of them was looking at a tolling structure. Second one was looking at cost optimizations in terms of capital and operations, and then looking at what was going to be the optimal debt to equity ratio. So here we talk about a little bit about the cost of gas. Again, on the left-hand chart, we show the two main indexes, which are a percentage of the cost of Brent crude, where LNG contracts are at 12% of Brent, or for the contracts that are tied to Henry Hub with an up factor of about $5. And then as compared to the Alaska LNG, standard rate of 670, we just looked at a historical backlook to see whether or not there were opportunities or times when we would be, beneath the market price and when we would be above the market price. So this shows that predominantly we are above the market price, certainly in comparison to Henry Hub. And then in certain times during around the 2016 and early 2020, around the price of Brent, when the oil prices dropped, we would have been above that. But again, we're looking at long-term contracts to be able to underpin these projects, so the buyers would have factored that into their considerations. Now, looking again on the right-hand side of the screen, this is where in 2016, we were at the right-hand part of this. We would have been high cost, but now we have shifted far to the left with only Qatar and Arctic LNG 2 expansion, as well as Nigeria as potential price projects below us. So one other thing that when we talked last year, again, the Biden administration was a new administration. They were talking about economic activity and putting forward major bills. What has actually passed is the infrastructure bill. And in that, we had originally tried to obtain funding for the phase one of our project that would have brought gas to Fairbanks. Unfortunately, we didn't receive that funding. However, the second component that we had in that bill was a provision that would allow the Alaska LNG project to be able to use federal loan guarantees that were put in place in 2004 by former Senator Stevens for the project that was envisioned to go from Prudhoe Bay to Alberta. And at the time, those loan guarantees were to be provided to the project developers with a basis of up to $18 billion. However, that language included an escalation factor that allowed those loan guarantees to increase over time. So between 2004 and 2022 now, we see that the loan guarantees are now up to $26.3 billion adjusted for inflation. That opportunity is now available to us for this project, and it would be available to backstop the individual project developers. So what it would mean, though, is that the US government would now pledge to pay the principal and interest on those loans in the event of a default. So this is major backstop for those lending institutions to fall back on the United States. The outcome of that is potentially rate reductions of anywhere between 1% and a 2.5% reduction on the cost of financing. And when I say that, our model uses about a 5% cost of financing. And if we were to see a 1% rate reduction, that would take it down to 4%, and a 2.5% would take it down to 2.5%. So that's fairly significant. And as you can see on the waterfall chart, that is an opportunity to utilize to make the project even more economic with the federal government backstopping it. What this means, and what's really ironic, is you've heard all of the negative news coming from the Biden administration about oil and gas prospects. We're seeing the impacts here in Alaska, but yet here the president has signed a bill that actually pledges the full faith and credit of the United States to backstop this project. So we feel very good about that because the federal government now has skin in the game, and that will help us overall.
Both Senator Murkowski and Senator Stevens had mentioned this component of the infrastructure bill. So it's neat to see how those numbers actually work, how that benefit accrues or potentially accrues for those loan guarantees.
Indeed. And so there's options. And again, we talked about a 20-year tenor. That's the model that we used, as well as Wood Mackenzie used. If you shift it out to 30 years, you can see you get another 38 cent reduction. And then if you shift from a 75-25 debt to equity ratio to an 80-20 ratio, then you can see that there's other opportunities for further reduction. Now, these determinations will be made again by the project developers as they go forward, is what's going to be the best options for them in terms of their financing structure. But this federal loan guarantee helps us out overall.
Speaking of the development partners, we did have a question in the chat box regarding the financial model you use to do your analyses, and does it include profit margin?
Yes. So when I talk about the economic model that AGDC uses, it's a joint economic model that was developed with the producers, along with the state of Alaska, with the Department of Revenue and the Department of Natural Resources. So we've got the resource owners, we've got the taxation arm, we've got the producers, and AGDC in collaboration developing an economic model looking at what will the overall costs and benefits be to the state of Alaska and to project developers. So what Wood Mackenzie has is their own independent analysis. And that 670 that I referred to previously doesn't include this federal loan guarantee. And it includes the full property tax rate of 20 mils that I'll talk to next. So they have an independent analysis. AGDC has a joint economic model, and the individual producers and buyers are going to have their own independent analysis. But right now, we're pretty aligned in terms of what the cost of supply is.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we talked previously, or last year when we were looking at the phase one of the project, about the impacts of the existing statute for oil and gas properties, which is set at 20 mil. So 20 mil on this project equates to approximately $800 million per year. This is an order of magnitude higher than any other jurisdictions, whether it be in the United States or around the world. And so that challenges the project economics. And so the tax regime map on the lower right-hand side gives kind of illustrations of what existing projects are receiving in terms of tax holidays or payment in lieu of taxes, as well as ongoing depreciation opportunities. And so Alaska, I would hope, will consider the impacts of the property taxes on the project economics to make it more economic, to make us viable, because the returns that will come back to the state of Alaska through our generation of royalty and production taxes, as well as potential ownership, will flow out to many of us and many of the communities and governments along the way. We would like to consider even, ownership potential for those communities rather than taxation. So bring in a little bit of opportunity, accept a little bit of risk, and maybe accept some of those rewards. But I really want to talk about the property tax benchmarking, because it does show a disadvantage for the state of Alaska compared to other jurisdictions in the US. Now, quickly, just doing
if you don't mind, do you mind backing up?
Go ahead.
Actually, I just wanted to open it up for questions. I don't have one myself. Does anyone have any question regarding this item? Okay, just wanted to give everybody the opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Just wanted to give a market update. And this is a recent analysis that was done by Gas Strategies, a consulting firm out of London that plays in the LNG market. But when they look at where the world is in terms of LNG consumption, and they factor in the net zero targets of the Asian countries, they still show that LNG out through 2040 will nearly double, and that there will be a demand for more production to be able to meet those needs. So there's two different charts here showing, existing liquefaction capacity along with, the global decarbonization model, which shows that, we'll be weaning ourselves of fossil fuels, including LNG, out through 2040 with a slight decline, and then a decline going off into the next decades, or a partial transition scenario where we don't wean ourselves off of LNG and oil as rapidly, but you have a increased demand for LNG going out through the 2050s. So that's where we see that there is opportunity for Alaska to be able to feed into that demand, because we have the supply at 20 million tons per year. You can see that we would be a small percentage of that future demand going forward. All right, and so now shifting away from what we received most recently from Wood Mac, and you saw in the materials that Jomo sent you, I really wanted to provide you with an overview of the transition that we've taken from what was the producer-led model back in the 2013 to 2016 timeframe, to the state-led model, where under Governor Walker we were working to be the project developer ourselves, to now we are working to bring in private sector developers that have the wherewithal, the balance sheets to be able to take on the project components, accept the risk, and look at those lower rates of return from a tolling model. So why are we following this type of structure? Well, back in 2016, you can see when Wood Mac's report came out, there were a very small amount of projects that had used a tolling structure. But since then, we're seeing that the major expansion in the US Gulf Coast has used this tolling structure model, and that equates to about 90 million tons per year of projects since around 2016. And that is a very good model that has proven to be commercially beneficial to those developers. And that is the model that we're hearing from the developers are acceptable to them to be able to bring on, to come into the project and take it forward. Okay, so this chart really just identifies the components of this commercial structure. Is the producers sell the natural gas at the outlet of the GTP, where then you have the private developers that would build and operate the pipeline and the LNG plant, and the buyers would be underpinning those with long-term contracts. So this takes it out from a producer-led model where they can be the gas developers, as they are with the oil on the North Slope, sell it, and then there'll be tolling structures to be able to move that product downstream, ultimately to the buyers and into Asia at a commercially viable rate. So where we find ourselves today is we feel that we've got an agreement on, as I said, the pipeline, as well as the gas treatment plant, the lead parties. And we're now focusing in on how or who will be best to lead the liquefaction plant development. So we developed this confidential information memorandum back in the late last year. And this has been one of the tools that we've been using in our discussions with the lead parties that identifies truly what the offer is, what the opportunities are, what the risks are for those projects, as well as who are the partners that are currently in the project and how we're working together. So we have had very fruitful discussions, spent a considerable amount of time in Houston over the fall, talking to folks into late winter. Unfortunately, came up with Omicron at the time and then came back to Alaska, which was how I spent my Christmas vacation. But those parties that we talked to with the cost of supply that we're showing them are showing some keen interest. And again, we looked at folks that had the crucial capabilities of a financial balance sheet that could push forward a project, that had proven success in developing and operating the projects that are currently in operation in North America. So I had hoped to be able to identify a lead party by this time. However, as you can envision, commercial negotiations on such a large component and project take time. We need to be patient, and I can say that we're making very good progress. My goal is to be able to hopefully secure a lead party by the end of the second quarter of this year, and then move forward with project development agreements over the next year or so before entering into the front-end engineering and design, and ultimately the final investment decision with a new target of 2024, and then entering into construction with final completion in the 2031 timeframe. So as we have marched along and optimized the project, we still have some major steps that we have to go through, including these project development agreements, the front-end engineering design, before we can begin construction. And then, as you know, the project benefits are not only the jobs that we'll create in Alaska, but the significant reduction in the cost of energy, as well as additional revenues coming into the state taxation. You've seen this before, a considerable number of jobs during construction over a peak period, up to upwards of 12,000 long-term operations jobs. So it'll benefit Alaska in the long term. And then back to where we envision Alaska will be once Alaska LNG is operational, is that we'll be able to provide gas in-state in between $4 and $5 per million BTU. This will be a significant reduction in current prices, saving Alaskans hundreds of dollars. Now, what Mary Ann brought up about, well, how is this going to impact, again, the operations in Cook Inlet? Well, again, if Cook Inlet has existing gas to be able to provide into the feedstock, that will be their opportunity to be able to utilize that gas for either use in state or for sale onto the Asian markets through LNG. And then our state revenues, again, Alaska Gasline Development Corporation currently owns 100% of this project. We are looking to bring in these private sector developers and divest ourselves of that ownership. We've retained in our models 25% ownership. However, that is yet a determination that needs to be made whether or not the state of Alaska will want to retain 25% ownership or completely divest ownership. There is risk reward that have to be considered in that equation. And that's a discussion that we'll be having with our board, with the administration, and with the legislature as we move this project forward. But I wanted to, again, and I apologize for being so quick today in terms of our presentation, but I'm in between two meetings, and so I wanted to make sure I was able to share with you some of the activities that we've undertaken over the last year.
All right, well, President Richards, much appreciated. We do have a few questions in the chat box. So if you don't mind, we'll touch on those and then we'll open up to just verbal questions. The first one was as far as location of the facility itself, there was a graphic there. My understanding is it's still Nikiski. Is that kind of co-located with the existing old BP plant?
So the Nikiski is the terminus of the pipeline, and it's the location of the liquefaction facility for Alaska LNG. It is on land that is not, it's in the proximity to what was ConocoPhillips LNG plant. It is near to the Nutrien ammonia and urea plant, but is on discrete and separate lands.
Okay. Thank you. There was also a question regarding, well, I always ask about that old facility because it had those nice big LNG tanks already on site. And of course, they've been allowed to warm, so they're not as valuable as they were when they were still chilled. But we learned from the IGU project, LNG storage is grossly expensive to construct. So to what extent what is the extent of lead party interest as far as any current commitment to AGDC?
Jomo, I'm sorry, my internet is showing I'm unstable, so I lost part of your question.
Okay. Luke, do you want to just hop on, fire away?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Frank. This is Luke Hopkins. Maybe if you see my picture up there, it's my wife's computer I'm using. But are you able to give any measurement of the extent of a lead party interest as far as any current commitment to AGDC's project at this time?
Yes. Good morning, Luke. I was wondering if you, I saw the woman in the picture frame, and I wasn't sure if that was labeled correctly. But
it is.
We do have a letter of intent from our pipeline lead party, and we're working on those similar agreements with an LNG lead party.
Is it a commitment of time, financing? Can you say anything about what that commitment is, or are you not allowed to?
Well, it is under confidentiality agreement. So I would I can identify that I have a letter of agreement, letter of intent.
Thank you.
So I will say this, because I can't remember if we've ever said this like this before, but there's a reason this task force, it started as the Fairbanks Cost of Energy Task Force, and then transitioned in, say, the 2008-9 timeframe, actually maybe a little later, to being called the Energy for All Alaska Task Force, when we did an analysis and it appeared that the highest value of a project like this for Alaskans would actually be the gas, if it was favorably priced, as opposed to dollars to the treasury, which is the way they normally look at it as value. You had that last slide regarding ownership structure, return to the state. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, again,
I'll put it like this. The recognition is that an Alaska LNG project is not going to replicate TAPS. It's not going to have the same number of jobs. It's not going to have the same kind of operating revenues. It's not going to make the same kind of royalty payments into the state treasury. Again, it's not going to replicate the the TAPS experience. So how do we maximize the value under that differing structure as a people?
Well, again, that's going to be a decision regarding the royalty in kind versus royalty in value discussion is a Department of Natural Resource responsibility. They will have to make that determination, prior to going into FID. The benefits, and you're absolutely right, the BTU value of natural gas compared to BTU value of oil is significantly different. And that's why, when you go on the sale of BTU energy, then you're not going to have as much value from the natural gas. However, it is an asset within the state of Alaska, coming off of the state leases. The state will be able to enjoy the value or the gas in kind. What we have, though, is this project is developed based on the existing resources within Prudhoe Bay and Point Thompson. And what we have, though, in the super basin of the North Slope is tremendous opportunity for additional oil and gas discoveries and development and operation. So we see this as an opportunity to be able to put in place a piece of infrastructure that oil and gas resources in the future will be able to then utilize to be able to sell to the world market. What I haven't talked about today is, potentially looking at the future proofing of the use of our methane in the use of development of hydrogen. So there's other opportunities that are out there for that methane, so solely than just LNG. And that will be dependent on the economics of the production of that hydrogen and whether or not it's competitive on the world market. But it's an opportunity that's out there for us going forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ray, I see you've taken yourself off mute again.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of ask this question. It's kind of strange. I've been watching this since the 70s and been active gas developer in Alaska and all that kind of stuff. And what you're proposing sounds like it makes a lot of sense right now. And that's in contrast to what I've heard over the years, right? And so the federal loan guarantees, coupled with if you can get the gas for $1, and I'll argue that that gas should have been selling for $1. In fact, I have purchased some of that gas before for $1 in years gone by. Today, I think I'm paying $2.50 or $3 for it. It's tied to the wellhead price. You're going to have to go back and I think it's going to take a little bit of legislation to fix the gas price mechanism as it's tied to the price of oil right now. For royalty purposes. And so what am I missing? It seems like you got the project pretty well figured out. How come Kinder Morgan and TransCanada and these guys aren't in here saying, hey, I'll take this deal?
That's a good question, Ray, and I'm trying not to have to be considerate of my confidentiality agreements that I have in place. I will say that there is keen interest from those developers, not necessarily those that you just identified, but from other developers that have proven to be successful and have operating plants under operation right now. And what we're trying to do then is to marry them up to make sure that we've got a structure for project development that will be successful for all. And as you know, the risk reward allocation across that model will be a very good discussion in terms of the challenges associated with it. But overall, what we're seeing is an interest in additional development for LNG on the Pacific coast.
I can understand that, right? And right now, today, you didn't mention it, but I mean, Bangladesh paid $36 for a couple of cargoes a month or so ago, and we've seen wild fluctuations in gas prices due to all this kind of stuff. But let me ask you another question. You're envisioning two separate developers, one for the plant, one for the pipeline?
Yes.
Okay, and then how do you allocate if you've got $26 billion in loan guarantees, how do you divvy that up?
Well, it's an opportunity for those developers, first of all, to make a determination if they want to use the loan guarantees, and then that'll be a discussion with the Department of Energy in terms of it's available to producers or developers of the project, that not just individual components of the project, but overall. So that's something that we will work out.
Okay.
All right. We do have one final question, as far as I can see. Oh, maybe another one here in the chat box. Is there still a quote unquote first stage development portion of this that brings the gas to Fairbanks, kind of as a phase one? Or we're kind of moving forward under the full project again?
Again, so it will take the private developers to reach an FID decision and an execution strategy. We'll be advocating for the opportunity to be able to deliver gas in the state at the earliest possible date. And that will be one of our roles in terms of advocating for Alaskans and Alaska's energy cost reductions. What that will ultimately be, that will be part of our discussions and negotiations with those developers.
Okay. Let's see. How are they handling cost of the tap? I think this is, well, in-state taps. We're still, again, we're all still, well, a lot of us are still focused on how we get the gas for utilization in state. And so again, I think we're still into that structure where we need to figure out how gas will get moved, say, to this community.
So again, the Alaska LNG project will have the opportunity for offtakes. We have permitted a lateral under the original project that we worked on, the ASAP project, leading into Fairbanks. And if there is a developer that wants to have that lateral and take that through to construction to provide direct access to the communities of Fairbanks, there are those developers that we have talked to that are very interested in doing that.
Oh, okay. So you can say that there have been folks potentially interested in that component. Okay, well, that's good. All right. Well, everybody, President Richards let me know right up front that he had a pretty hard start for this. And as he's noted, he has another meeting coming, so he has a pretty hard stop. We are at about 8:49. So I would open it up for just a couple of more questions if anyone has any final questions to ask. Going once, going twice. Oh, I see Clark, sir.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Frank. A brief kind of high-level question. Are there, at this point, are there any major detractors? This is terrible and anti-green, you know. I just wondered if you have a big hill to climb, because as Ray said, this is a new dance and very, very, very interesting. But I just wondered if it's going to be an uphill fight to convince people.
Good morning, Clark. It's good to see you.
Yes, sir.
So you raise a very good point. We have received our federal authorization from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We received our final EIS. We received our authorization to construct the LNG facility, and we have from the Department of Energy authorizations to sell LNG to both free trade and non-free trade countries. Now, our friends at the Center for Biological Diversity and the Sierra Club have filed two suits, one against the FERC authorization and the second one against the Department of Energy authorization to non-free trade countries. So those are ongoing in the U.S. District Court. The first action, the Sierra Club and CBD indicated that FERC had not done a good job in administering its NEPA responsibilities. This is their standard type of language where they take on large projects, specifically with FERC and challenge them on the process. But I can tell you from participating in this project and seeing other projects, FERC did an excellent job in administering their responsibilities. They did it very, very timely, and they made sure that the other agencies had the direct input that they needed to be able to make sure it was a robust document. We submitted our application and we responded with over 150,000 pages of environmental engineering documentation on this project. We feel that there is a tremendous record. We factored in all of the responsibilities and requirements of the federal regulations for protection of flora, fauna, marine mammals, endangered species, et cetera. So we feel that what they're doing in their lawsuit is kind of standard fare for them. And the court has proven time again that FERC, they side with FERC to say that, yes, they have done a good job once they look at the document. And FERC has done, even this administration with the new Democratic commissioners is doing a great job in defending their authorizations. So that's good that just occurred back in December, and we'll be looking for oral arguments sometime later this summer. On the Department of Energy, their challenge was that the project didn't factor in full greenhouse gas emissions on a life cycle basis, meaning the project didn't consider greenhouse gases from oil and gas production on the North Slope, including the project and looking downstream into the Asian markets where the gas would be consumed. So that's called their life cycle greenhouse gas analysis, and that's what the Department of Energy determined that they would do a review of that. It's a publicly available format to follow. We did that format over about a month's time, and it showed that we would be reducing the greenhouse gas emissions as compared to a coal plant in Asia by over 77 million metric tons of CO2 per year, or about 54% reduction in CO2. So we feel that argument, they made it, but they're going to be proven to be wrong, that this is using LNG as compared to coal is a significant benefit for the world's environment.
Hey, Frank, I think I just pulled this up on your website. Am I allowed to share that report?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and put that in the chat box as well.
One last question, Jomo.
Please.
Frank, many years ago under George Bush's administration, they created the federal coordinators position, and they authorized that. Is that, and that was to help us with the differences between the agencies and getting caught up in some kind of permitting quagmire between the various BLM, BI, whatever. Is that position still authorized, and will it be able to assist with any remaining federal level permits?
You're bringing back history, Ray, and I appreciate that. I was actually the deputy coordinator in that office. The legislation still exists for that coordinator to be in place. The funding hasn't been provided for that under the White House budget. There was an office in the White House. So, but that was originally coordinated to coordinate the initial federal processes. I would say we are past that point right now. However, going into construction, as you can well experience, where you have the myriad of regulators, whether it be the federal regulators from PHMSA to Fish and Wildlife Service, to the BLM, to the Forest Service, the Park Service, you name it, in addition to the state regulators, that's where we need to have essentially alignment. Otherwise, we've got folks out on the alignment that would stop work authorization that could wreak havoc with the project.
Just as a piece of friendly advice, as somebody who's caught up in a state quagmire right now, trying to put a small treating plant in Bruto, boy, if you could get a similar position within the state level that position was on the federal level, because you can get caught up between DNR, DEC, and the rest of them, and it'll be an expensive proposition. It'll cost you time, et cetera, et cetera. So you might think about lobbying for some kind of a cabinet level person to help you bird dog the problems you're going to be dealing with on a state level.
There exists in state statutes that position already.
Oh,
and
great.
we need to be able to have that conversation with the administration on the goals. I'd love to be able to talk to you offline and hear about the concerns, the challenges that you've been facing, so I can use those as a prime example.
We can talk about that.
Okay. I don't have your contact number, but maybe Jomo, you could connect Ray and I.
See what I can do.
Well, all right, everybody. I appreciate it. I apologize for having to run off. I always like my conversations with my Fairbanks friends. So thank you for taking the time today.
President Richards, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us. As always, we'll keep monitoring this project as it advances. Thank you for doing all the hard work to keep it moving forward. We really appreciate it. Well, all right, everybody. I think yes, sir. I think we're done for the day. Just as a word for next week, I believe we have GBEA lined up to be our speaker for next week. So we will have GBEA. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, great rest of the week. I hope it warms up for all of us. Stay warm, safe, and we'll see you next week. All right, bye.